Okay, thank you very much. Now we're into the second section, which is about power. Even while Liza is not here, we're going to start the introduction so that we can get into this rapidly. And from your left of the table, introducing, we have Therese Gallagher and we have Marianne Lewis. They both work for Camden Council. What would you say? You're both on the No, I can't say that. Can you? You're both on the HS2 team. Euston. Sorry, the Euston team. Who's not here? The empty chair, which will be filled very shortly, is Liza Fior. She's the founding partner of Muff Architecture in London. She's also a professor at Central St Martin's. By the way, just to clear up, we are from University of the Arts London and also Central St Martin's. Central St Martin's is one of the colleges. And directly to my right is Francesca Petrella, who is a professor of social economy and management theory of the organisations at Aix-Marseille University. I think even without Liza here, we should really start. So, Therese, Marianne, can you? Yeah, I think we should get rumbling because we haven't got time on our side. So, thank you very much.
Sure. Can you hear me all right? Great. So, as Mick has said, we work for Camden Council. So that's a local government in London, and we're going to talk to you today about our approach at Camden and the local kind of example at Euston, where we're doing a pilot to look at how participatory research and social value priorities can be established. There's a lot going on in Euston at the moment, so there's lots of central government decisions being made around the train services that come into Euston Station. So we might be a little bit distracted because there's Prime Minister's been making speeches and all sorts today about the future of Euston. So it's all very dramatic, as usual, at Euston. But essentially, sorry, I need to get better at coordinating one thing with the other. Essentially, Camden, as a local government organisation, has been looking at how to improve, I suppose, the approach we take to deliver better outcomes for our residents, and social value is a big part of this. So back in March 2022, Camden produced a new strategy called We Make Camden, where we looked at how to or set out exactly what we wanted to achieve and how we would lead with our communities going forward. It was a call to action, so we set out some shared challenges or shared approaches, and it set out our values, how we wanted to, what values were important to us, and it was also worked on with our communities, so they helped us to identify our priorities and our the things that we should be focusing on to deliver. And it also came out of some work that we did post-COVID with an organisation or the sort of setup called the Renewal Commission, which is in 2021. And so we got some missions that came out of that piece of work to look at how we could radically improve the way we work with our partners, citizens and the community to improve life in Camden. Is that right? So this slide sort of sets out kind of how we have worked from how we used to work as a government organisation. And we're very focused on outcomes through a more purpose-led approach where we developed and shared our core purpose throughout the organisation. And then that kind of deepened our understanding of the approach to now how we're more missions orientated. So we've got clear organisational purpose, and that's set out in that document that I just showed you. And that basically filters down into everything we do. We need to relate back how we're delivering on the missions, and it's focused on building those sort of strong relationships and empowering innovation, both within the council and in our communities, who are going to help us deliver on these missions that we've identified. And we want to be a more dynamic and relational organisation, so something that is building something together with its communities rather than doing it on our own. So that's kind of all set out in that document. Going down into more detail, so the 4 missions that we're looking to achieve over the coming years are focused around diversity. The other one is around young people, making sure that every young person has access to economic opportunity. Food, making sure everyone is able to eat well every day. And then estates and neighbourhoods, which is Therese and I are most kind of involved in this mission, is around having by 2030, so Camden's estate, so the sort of housing that we manage, and their neighbourhoods are healthy, sustainable, and unlock creativity. So a lot of the work that Therese and I do is focused around that mission in particular, and as I said before, collaboration is needed with external organisations and the communities. So we've obviously been working with Central St Martin's on some of these things, which we'll talk to you about in more detail through the rest of the presentation. So to understand, a big part of kind of some of the debates we've had is around how do you understand, how do you measure what is valuable to the local community. So Camden started this piece of work, and we've piloted it in Euston, where we used our local citizens to go out and be scientists, so to go and do the research for us, to understand from their community what is valuable to them. So we had, I think it was 20 social scientists that went out and undertook sort of qualitative, so interviews, various pieces of research, to understand what people's lived experiences were, what they wanted to see from life, what would a good life look like for them in Euston. And then we replicated that approach also as a borough-wide basis. And essentially that process is outlining how to develop a survey. So those sort of diagrams you see on the screen are the things that have been identified as most important to the individuals. So on the left-hand side, to Euston, and on the right-hand side, that's a sort of Camden-wide. They're very similar, so people, have similar aspirations, but it really is kind of drilling down on those things that are important to people, and then developing metrics that sit alongside those, so we as policymakers can understand or measure the impact on from different projects over time against these metrics. And the idea is that you go back, you do a household survey every 3 years so that you can then understand impacts over time. So that's kind of one of the ways we are kind of holding ourselves accountable against all the missions that we've set. We want to be able to measure outcomes through these metrics, rather than just the standard way of taking information, like centralised information from our census kind of data. So now drilling down into more detail at Euston. So Euston Station sits right on the edge of central London, or it is in central London. It's a huge station, and as I said, it's impacted by a high-speed rail line that's planned to come into Euston. It's confirmed it's coming in today, so we know it's actually coming. It was in doubt again. But essentially around the station itself, there's development opportunities, and our sort of focus has been how do we make the most of those opportunities from the railway station being redeveloped for our local communities. And as you can see there, it's a big area, and it's basically dividing our communities. Like, how can we get the long-term redevelopment to contribute to the local communities physically and socially, and then also how do we, while it's all being constructed, how on earth do we get something back for the communities? And that's where Meanwhile comes in, which Therese will talk to you about. This is just a demonstration that it's been a really long project. So we started, Therese and I have both worked on it for 10 years plus now, and there's still a hole in the ground and nothing's being built. So there's a lot of uncertainty, which makes, meanwhile, even more difficult to plan for as well, because we don't actually know how long the sites are going to be available for. But we're doing what we can and working within the remit that we can. Euston has a complicated web of governance because of all the different transport, mainly because of all the transport partners involved. So we've got railway operators, we've got transport, so buses and underground rail lines. They all need to provide certain infrastructure, and that's driven the design and the long-term opportunity to date. We've been trying to work to reverse it, to be more of a growth regeneration focus with the transport elements as not second afterthought, but kind of more integrated approach rather than the transport driving the approach. So there was a review a few years ago, and this kind of organisational governance came out of that. Today we found out there's probably going to be a different evolution of this now, but essentially all of these partners are important in delivery, so we have to work with these organisations to achieve anything. And I'll hand over to Therese to explain exactly how we've been working with them at Euston.
Thank you, and hello everyone. So just to talk a bit about within that wider context that we work in Camden with the participatory approach, these are three examples of different projects that have been really working with the local community, and it recognised the importance of resourcing those community members to take part in that work. So that would either be through direct payment to the individual members that took place, or it would be through training or through resourcing the community groups that support them to do their work. And that was really important in enabling people to take part. I think one of those projects was the Good Life Euston project. And you can see Marianne referred to that earlier about the different so identifying what was important, so that could be monitored over the lifetime of projects. And what it does, having that annual every 3-year survey, allows there to be a shared evidence base that the different partners, all those different partners can use. And one of the things that we as an organisation thought that was really important, there were lots of different commitments to social value by the different organisations that were operating in Euston. There were lots of people saying they were going to do things, but it was about consolidating that in one place and developing what's known as the Euston Social Value Charter, and then that will be measured against the household survey. That will be a key piece of evidence, as will other data that will be collected by others. And then if we just move on, I think, so that's the approach that Camden as an organisation has taken. And we have an influencing role in this. We're not always directly responsible for what's delivered. So we are trying to encourage others and use that approach to feed into often complicated governance structures, and then trying to give communities a voice within that. So just on meanwhile opportunities, I think Marianne referred to kind of a complicated history. About it was in March this year, a pause to the works was announced. So there's basically a massive construction site that's homes have been demolished. So there's been years of impact for local communities, but they haven't seen benefits to date. It's been a very constrained construction site, and more recently there's been a pause to those works. So there has been an opportunity to actually deliver something physical for them. prior to that, it was more about identifying opportunities outside of the red line that were more project-based, but now there is kind of more physical opportunities. Skip on. And what that meant in terms of not having the sites for Meanwhile meant that there was a lot of time to work with communities and identify what priorities were. And there's been, over the years, there's been a number of different projects that have been council-led, that have been developer-led, that have been, various different projects. And it's those commonality of themes that have come out of all of them, that what is important to people and what the principles are that they want to see, how they want to see those priorities delivered. And it also meant that we were able to identify strategic objectives. So when the opportunities have arisen, we're not starting from scratch and starting those conversations again. We're able to build on them. And I think colleagues in the room, as part of the T Factor project, have been instrumental in building those relationships and working with local communities. And I think it's allowed us across sort of three main areas that work where there hasn't necessarily been a sort of a physical space to use. It's allowed relationships to be developed and trust to be built. It has given people experience to build capacity and to establish ways of working, that it would be, for example, the projects will be delivered through a shared approach of all those organisations, rather than it just being the landowner that develops them. So everybody has a say in that. And then also making sure that there is alignment between the objectives of the different groups. And then just to finish up, I'm going to hand back to Marianne to talk about one final example.
Thank you. So this last example is a very, hopefully gives you a sense of what our residents have lived through next to the HS2 work site. So that's a picture of the tower block, residential blocks being demolished to make way for the railway. And then we've got some blocks right next to them where resident HS2 said that it would be okay for residents to live in. But as the demolition sort of started and the construction work started, we realised it was untenable for some of the residents to continue to live there. And so we managed to offer them voluntarily to move out to another council property. And so we've got some spaces in those blocks. So this project, we work with Bow Arts, who are active in other parts of London, to utilise some of those empty residential units to pilot an arts meanwhile use in them. It's been really successful. There's 17 units that have been used so far, and we've got a real variety of different artists utilising the space. And the next phase of the work, we're trying to incorporate more community uses to make sure that there's a link between the artists that are taking the space with the local communities, and utilising some of those meanwhile spaces or studio spaces for the community to kind of take ownership of and to have actual space, which links in with all the work that has been done, as Therese mentioned, with colleagues on T Factor, trying to link those, make those relationships and the information gathered through all of that work over the last few years, giving some physical space back to that project if we can negotiate that. So that's just a really live example to end with.
Thank you so much for that. We're going to do questions at the end, but if anyone does want to jump in with a question, please do. But we will be going to a discussion at the end. But you all good? I think you are. So rapidly, we'll move on to Liza. Liza, we've already introduced you, so we know who you are.
I'm ready. Let me go for a bit thicker. Thank you. So firstly, a big thank you. I'm going to get my phone out. I just never got a clock, so I keep to my time. So yes, I have a practice in London. We design public spaces, some of them are buildings, which attempt to make space for more than one thing at a time. This is not off the first slide. Oh, sorry. That's right.
Liza.
Yeah.
You've got to...
Okay, sorry, but Okay, there we are. Hi. And I have, my assistant made me some French subtitles, and it all sounds better. So number one is that in much of our work, the first job is to find a way to make the space public. And also in many of our projects, we're not asked for social value. And so perhaps I think my question, my thought is that precision is necessary for design to be beautifully useful, and out of that precision can come social value. And so I'm going to show today, I'm going to show one project and first some examples to explain what I mean. So this is not a drawing by my office. It is a vision for a neighbourhood called Whitechapel of the development opportunities that could come with the new station. This is our drawing, adding the implications of the proposal, the detail. And I think it is that consideration of how things might land is where you can bring the social value. Two, we recognise that we're not representative of the places we work, and so therefore we must expand our team to keep the door open and bring in the knowledge from local partners, and sometimes move away from the table to recognise that should happen. Use, I think, as other people have said, can change meaning of how spaces are understood. So this photograph is from Paris 1969, when adding a baby to an office turns it into a creche. And we work both with neighbourhoods, and so this is a drawing from a recreation centre, a sports centre, where a decision was made to demolish it because it was not practical, but a community energy made it protected by historical listing. And it was the value, social value, which was one of the reasons, as well as the physical architecture. There is a quote in red that I think is familiar, where a local resident said, "It always feels as investment comes for other people, to bring other people in." And so what we did was, when you make architecture of a building that has been given historical importance, you do it extra carefully, and then to ask the question, what does it mean to work extra carefully with the people of a place? And if you perhaps treat that place with the same care as the historical architect makes to every brick they change. And so here, a local children's centre did a 5-week project to ask how can play come to public space. And it was completely different to what we might have done of, let's make a takeover. Because instead, the first thing they did was to make a boundary. First they made the boundary, then they made the play. We're working at all scales. We were invited to the Victoria and Albert Museum, who had declared themselves to be a public space. And we attested this through trying it out, and invited a charity called Women for Refugee Women to just relocate their Monday activities to the museum and to find the space to be within it. And what was interesting to us was there was this moment when they expressed their desire to bring their object to the museum. It was a bit of a fight, But it was, I think at that point, successful. And to recognise that it's a two-way street, this idea of reaching out and bringing in. So I'm just going to end this presentation with just talking about one project where perhaps what social value, the value of social value, is when you can change expectations, expand a brief. And this is a project which, like your projects, it started with a commission in 2009. So the first image was a vision for this new neighbourhood beside another train station. This was the site, because during the period of making plans, a wall had been built around it, and the plans were taking time. And they made, I love this phrase, the nom de marque, the branding, was Ruskin Square, because a artist and philosopher had his mother had been born in the neighborhood. But the good thing was he was a very prolific artist, wrote many books about nature, about art, about culture. And so we were able to use his writing to expand the project. So for example, he said, La vie c'est la richesse. But our client were very anxious. They had created this new place and they were slightly anxious about the neighborhood they were making it in. So they made it very clear, no benches. Nobody spending too long there. No benches. So we started and they were open to this idea during the period of design to make a space and make ways into that closed territory. So with the smallest number of paths and the research that we'd done in meeting the locale, we built cricket practice nets because cricket was popular. I must mention, and there's a drawing showing the minimum expense to take up the greatest area with these skinny paths, thin paths, and areas of gathering. And here you see the path takes you to the cricket net and the wilderness grows around it. And so we made the proposal that the public space would come first. And we were lucky enough that they had enough money and they had the aspiration, and particularly the planning officials supported this as a way of progressing. And so we made first a connection between the railway station and the street, and you'll see a bench, but we said it was a temporary one for this first piece. We were also able to make a mountain because Ruskin loved mountains, and we worked with the play expert to make it safe. So in fact, the mountain is a playground. And things began to become looser. People became less frightening because the space was being used. And at every 3 or 4 years, we've gone back to a research phase with the neighbourhood. It should be mentioned that the UK's Centre for Immigration is in East Croydon. It's just next door. And so we did work with a lot of asylum seekers and young people in care. And this was a piece of work led by artist partner at MUF to explore the idea of work and artistic creation and craft in advance of a commission of an art piece. I'm looking at my time, thank you, Mick. And I'm not going to talk about all the complexities, but to say out of that care to find who might be using this place in the future that began with a cricket net, we've ended up with many places to sit and a series of spaces which during lockdown in particular were able to be occupied usefully. And I'm just going to end with our diagram, which I think is the useful one. It's not the question of how much social value am I delivering. It's recognizing that it's always messy. It's easy to find yourself down at the bottom of the test tube. Compromises have to be made, but by attempting a precision of not just the big brushstroke of who am I designing for and what am I designing, some contribution can be made. Thank you very much. And I'd like to say a big thank you, though, because just being here with everybody has, I was like, I would like to make a completely new presentation. Sorry. I just wanted to say a big thank you, and I've been very humbled by what I've seen, and I'm even more humbled by the questioning LaboFriche makes to its way of working, of the idea there's always a question, and you're always moving high above the line. It's great stuff.
Thank you so much. It's a great contribution after Marianne and Therese. Nothing coming from the floor. C'est à vous.
C'est à moi. Thank you so much for inviting me. So, as you know, I'm Francesca Petrella from Aix-Marseille University, so I'm not from T-Factor project, but I'm really happy to be here, and I really appreciated what I've heard until now. So, I will present something completely different, but I try to put some ideas together and to contribute to the questions. So I've done this work. Maybe I take this.
Sorry.
Thank you. I will present a literature survey that I did with two other colleagues, Marion Studer and Giorgia Trasciani, for public institution. And so it's interesting how this report now is debated in different places. So we engage in policy, as I heard before. So quickly, why I go quickly through the beginning, because all of you know about social impact, but I've been asked by Eva to give some contextual elements of what is the debate in France, and then to finish with some opportunities and risks of social impact evaluation. So we worked on non-profit organizations, but I think most of what we will have found is can be adapted to the whole social economy. So why to study it? I wanted to recall you what is the definition of social impact. I'm really happy that you use social value more than social impact, even if there are some similarities. I'll go back to that. And I think that when you mention impact, it is quite difficult to evaluate, as you just mentioned already, all of you, because you take direct effect, indirect effect, you take external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and it's not in that definition, but you mentioned time. And in fact, impact, it's not a direct outcome. It could come in 10 years' time. And so it's difficult to evaluate impact, not only on the short run, even if it's what the public authorities are asking, but impact can be in 10 years' time, for instance. So why did we do the literature review? Why people have asked us to do that? It's because now it is quite institutionalized that you have to evaluate your impact. It's really diffused in French, but I wanted to remind you that evaluation is a political act. And I think until now, we spoke about metrics, about like we could have objective indicators, but I think I disagree totally with that. Even a metric, even an objective indicator is subjective. is a political act, because you can choose what you measure, you can choose the metric, and so you always make a judgment, you always make a choice. Patricia said that you go in, you serve a political agenda, for instance, so I think we have to forget to say that we can have objective metrics. It's not me who say that. We have in France a specialist about that, Alain Desrosières, and he said that's already in the 2001. So it's not new at all, but it's good to recall that if you evaluate whatever you do in quantification and whatever, you make a judgment, and value is not absolute. So it's important to insist on that. So, very quickly about France, because it has been mentioned before. I think it came, as in the UK or in the US, it came, we spoke about social impact assessment because we also have a really important shift into the paradigm, into new public management. So I think social impact assessment is an instrument of new public management. And we have to admit that and be cautious if we go into it. Second element is that it's not only a paradigm shift in public policies, in public action, it's also in the methodological paradigm that you have behind that. Patricia mentioned things about methodologies. I'd like to go even further to say it's not a question only about input and outcomes. When you speak about impact, you pretend to be able to measure the changes in the social system that would not have happened without your action. So you have to take out what they call the deadweight loss. And it's not easy. If you want to demonstrate that, when you speak about social impact, the paradigm behind that, which is not mentioned by many local actors or national actors, is that you want to demonstrate a causal link between your actions and the effect. That means in terms of methodology, you need to have a control group. And yeah, but that's it. It's the truth, in the sense that if you want to use that word, that means it goes to the theory of change and all these things that everybody uses. But in fact, the idea behind that is, do you want to prove a causal link? And on a line, you spoke about systemic approach. We are not at all into a systematic approach here. But this is what public authorities are expecting and want you to do. Third element, and I think it has been a little bit mentioned, it's also today, we spoke about money and we need to have economic sustainability and so on. In fact, it's really linked, and it comes in France too, it's really linked with social investment, in impact investing, and if you see what is discussed at the European level today, I think to attract private investors, you now have to look not only about economic or financial profitability, but also of social profitability. So I think evaluation, impact assessment is also an issue for public authorities, but also in terms of philanthropic and how do you say, mobilization of funds from other parts than the public funds. I go quickly, but we can discuss about that if you want. Then fourth element that is typical to France, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in fact we really created in a few years a market of the impact evaluation. You cannot imagine how many different actors are now proposing methods to evaluate impacts, and some are asking a lot of money for that. So you have plenty of consultancies firms, and strange enough or surprisingly enough, these are also the ones that proposed before to evaluate the CSR, corporate social or societal responsibility issues. So it's not at all the same idea, but they are the same people that are asking for the methodology. So it's in French, I'm afraid. I could not translate, and it's not very clear. I can share my slides if you want, but you have actors that help before the evaluation, how to decide which type of methods and so on, then the one who evaluates, and then the one to are there to diffuse the results of the evaluation. And so not only consultants, but also universities, business schools, and a lot of intermediaries. Who spoke about intermediaries? Carol, you did. About intermediaries that are there to help all the association to measure the impact and so on. So they are really important, and I'll discuss about that to finish, but they're really important in producing shared standards, shared indicators. So you have your toolkit to evaluate. And it's not only private consultants that come with that, but also consultant from the social economy side. So this is quickly the background in France. So to sum up, so for today it's really a crucial challenge for association, because as you said for the UK and even in France, everybody, all non-profit organization, or as soon as you get public funds, you need to prove, to demonstrate your impact, your usefulness, effectiveness, and so on. But it meets also one important need from non-profit organization is legitimacy and recognition. You have mentioned that too. But I think it's important that we speak a lot about the evaluation as a way to demonstrate in terms of accountability, to prove the value, but we need to remember that it can also be important as an improvement of quality, as an internal process, as a learning process that could take time. And it's something that Marek, who spoke before, did with the community centers. And it took time, but the first impact is for the centers themselves to improve their action. And it can also motivate all the workers to really realize what is their impact for them and for other stakeholders, of course. So I think there's too strong focus on accountability, demonstration of usefulness, and we forget that it can be really useful for the non-profit organization as well. And of course, you mentioned that too, it could be important in terms of advocacy. So it's at the end of the slide, but it's very important, and it's a summary of what you all have said, so I will just mention. I think measure the impact is important if you do a systematic approach and not a causal one. So you can look for multiple causality, but you presented a lot of methods that are more systemic than causal. You involve multiple stakeholders and you co-design the criteria. You gave a lot of examples like this, and I'm nearly finished, but another 3 minutes. And so the question was power, and so I wonder how to make a link with power. And so for me, I understood power, not what you said about value, what can do value, but for me, power, I think there's a relationship with public authorities when you speak about social impact and how to evaluate it. So for me, not only with public authorities, but also with for-profit enterprises that can also be an example, because they also measure the impact in France. I don't have the time to go on with this, but now it's very fashionable. Every enterprise is an enterprise with a positive impact. So that's something, another issue that we will have to deal in France. But quickly, there are many risks about the fact that you use to adopt what is expected from you, standardized methods, as you say, causality methods, and so on. The risk is isomorphism. I don't know if you know the word, is the fact that it's a tendency to adopt the same behaviors as others. And it can be coercitive, imposed by public authorities, can be mimetic, because you feel very comfortable to use a kit that is done by others, and normative, and I think we all have a responsibility here, by providing our own indicators we contribute to a normalization, I don't know if it's the good word in English, of practices and methods and so on. So it's important to have this in mind. I go quickly to the fact that you can be, as an organization, completely instrumentalized. It has been well developed by Patricia. You serve the agenda of someone else. It's not new, but I think the question of evaluation brings it back at the heart of the debate. Cooptation. It means that I think you align your interests, your discourses and practices with another social group. And there's really a dominant position because you adopt all the languages of a group that is more powerful than you. And I think the debate, and we can discuss after that, why should we use the languages of others because they are more powerful than us? How can we do it without losing our minds? It's a real question. Of course, we need to be understood, but how far we go with that objective? And then the last one, and I finish with that, is about performativity. I don't know if you know the word, but it's the fact that when you use some methods, in fact, to measure the effect, at the end of the day, this method will change the activities themselves that you try to measure. So it's really important to have in mind that evaluation is not neutral and that in fact by doing this you can also change what you provide, but not to improve the quality of the service, but to match to be performative in the sense that you match what people expect from you. So that's it, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And I think you've brought to the fore, actually, a very clear analysis, and also culturally some of the differences of how we in the UK and you in France are looking at the same thing. And I'd love to hear a bit more about social value more than impact, but I was thinking of this internal aspect you're talking about, that measuring should be an internal, can work as an internal process. That seemed to be what the Euston team, Therese and Marianne, were talking about. And I'm not going to put this as a question, I'm going to put this out to the floor. But it seemed to me, one question there is how much of that the metrics that you're using is for you, and how much is actually goes up, if you like, the line or down the line. And similarly with Liza, I'm wondering how much you were, because it seemed that most of the parameters you were putting in terms of that were being generated in terms of social value, you were bringing into the project. I didn't get the feeling that it was a brief as such, that you actually, which is, and there's another question there, is what, and this, no, it would be, well, what is the impact of that to the client in a sense? But can I leave that there, just floating around, because I think there must be much better questions out here.
Thank you very much for sharing all of this. I will try to express it in English. Even in French is hard in mine right now. Do you think it could be interesting or powerful to look at the risks what can be avoided in, for example, if I have a cultural program, I will look at the social value, but we never talk about maybe the problems, the issues which can be involved, like about healthness. You've been around here in LaBoFriche. You've been the neighborhood where we are. So if I talk about violence, for example, if I talk about consequences that can, if we don't take care about our place here, sorry, I forgot to say I work here in LaBoFriche, so getting involved in the neighborhood. And we never talk about all the invisible, But for me, it's if I'm working and I can get involved people from the neighborhood in my program, I'm thinking about things that will not happen. But I cannot put a number for my financial in front. I can't explain it, but I think there's a way of maybe create something about this invisible economy. Not sure I'm really clear.
Being a good neighbor apart from anything. Like you're being a good neighbor. I mean that you're acting in a. Your neighborliness is not necessarily quantified.
I'm talking from being a worker. What I'm trying to say, if I'm working with getting involved the people in my cultural program. For example, I work in I don't know, have a workshop about music and rap, and I will hip hop, and I will work with many kids from the neighborhood. During this time, they are not getting in jail. Sorry, I'm being a bit hard here to try to get my example. But I know behind this that will cost less to the states, and that will cost less to the public policy.
Well, I don't have a clear answer to that, but just to say that, as Mathilde said, you can work on externalities, and I know that many institutions would like to have data on that, about avoided costs. And so we tried to do that in a European project 20 years ago, even more. And it was quite difficult to do that because it's hard to measure. As everything you do, it's hard to measure. So we try to find proxies about what would be the cost to be unemployed, to be in jail, to be taken away from your family with the social aid and so on. That was very disappointing, but we gave what they wanted. In fact, at the European level, they want a metric, as we said, and so. But with that, we try to say that it's really interesting to look at externalities, but also in terms of avoided cost, and not only negative or positive externalities. But there's no method, clear method for that.
Before we go to someone. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something to avoided cost methodology, because that's something that is a lot done in the environmental economics. That will say, okay, if you have this forest nearby, in health, okay, what avoided cost in hospital, and all those kind of things. But I think it's a really tricky method that just leans into the capitalist paradigm that needs to measure everything in monetary value, and I don't think we want to go down that road actually, because it's just giving a cost to things that cannot be really valued. So yeah, avoided cost for me is not the way to go, but it's a debate we can have.
Patricia, are you there? I've heard
Hello,
that.
yes, I am. Thank you. I guess I must be loud.
You're loud.
Yet again, what a fascinating conversation. Let me just offer maybe a very quick comments on each presentation. I mean, if we are looking for any illustration that decision making in policy is not necessarily based on solid evidence and understanding of causal relations, my heart goes out to colleagues in Houston, given the vicissitudes of subjective whimsy that are surrounding their work every day, coming from central government, and that was probably a barbed comment. Anyway, what Liza said made me think that who knows? Could it be that that was a concrete example of something I was signaling at, meaning that cultural value, even though it cannot be measured, expressed in monetary terms, can be made manifest through social value. So basically, it's precision, maybe an aspect of cultural value. I'm curious to poke a little whether it pertains to aesthetic dimension or co-presence cultural dimension. And lastly, Francesca, I don't think that two wrongs make a right. But yeah, we, I guess, have a case of like a bad isomorphism here, in that you ended up with new public management approaches as well. And I obviously, I'm on board with what you had to say. And I wonder if we kind of can come to agree that it comes down to that evaluation, yes, serves different functions. There's the accountability, there's the funding demand, but there's also learning and empowerment. And something that is maybe quite missing is like transparency and translation. Like maybe we should have like more literacy about what can be meaningfully measured, demonstrated, and where we just have to draw just red lines, because then the whole exercise is becoming ridiculous. Anyway, thanks so much for your extremely insightful presentations.
Thank you, Patricia. Adam. Adam wants to. Yeah. By the way, this is Adam Thorpe, who is our principal investigator. And
thank you. Especially in the context of Euston, I guess, because that's in our local area, but at other contexts, broader contexts as well. I'm reminded of Hannah Arendt that says that there is only power with, there is no power over. That power over is violence. So if we accept that that power only exists as power with, and if we accept that we're exploring the relationship between value, power, and evaluation, i.e. who decides what it is we value and therefore what we measure, then I think it was encouraging to see the participatory approaches that we've seen to participatory approaches, so power with in defining the values that we might measure, and participatory approaches in terms of power with, in terms of how you are delivering them and prototyping them in practice. So I just really, it's to note, perhaps it's obvious, but to note for me the importance of participation in the practices that try to address sort of power and value. So thanks for your example.
Any responses to that, or?
Someone want to react? I just find it interesting whether you had an answer to that question about what if you hadn't done anything. Sorry. No, I was just asking that now.
Yeah, I suppose I was coming back to the first question around how you value, I suppose, that kind of approach or what you do that hasn't got a financial value. And that's partly why we did this well-being approach at Euston, is that it can measure some elements of things that our communities are saying are important to them, and they've defined, calling them domains, but they've defined the key things that are important to their lives in the area. And we're taking the approach that we are giving that value, so we're ascribing value to the outcomes of that process, but it's not financial in the sort of day-to-day work. But because of the framework we've got as an organisation, it is given a value by us, and we're trying to make, through the social value charter that we've created for Euston, that's kind of drawing that into the wider organisation. So we're sort of drawing the values that we are extracting, I suppose, from our communities, and trying to draw them through that thread into the wider partners in the area who probably, if left to their own devices, wouldn't really be interested in some of those elements. So that's kind of what I would respond.
No, come on. Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
I wanted to say a few words to react on different things. I agree. Of course, I don't think that avoiding cost methodology are the best. I say that they are possible. And I really appreciate the fact that I think one of the key issues is participation and in all the processes. And so it's interesting because here we have good examples and Houston is perfect example. I think it's very naive from my side, but we could do advocacy with that. I think it's important to be proud of what has been done and show that other methodologies and social impact and all are possible and produce these interesting results for the communities, but also for the rest of the world. Patricia mentioned about transparency and translation. I think we really need to translate that what we do can be understandable to others, and why should we try to be understandable by the others by using their languages. I think there are plenty of people that agree with what has been done here and discussed. So I think we need intermediary organization. We need I don't know what, but I think it's really time in France anyway for sure to advocate and show that there are other methodologies to measure social value that the one that is provided by everybody. And also, I think one not solution, but one experiment we could do, we tried with another research but you mentioned that, to make visible what is invisible, in fact. And I think if you list a lot of things that you do that are not usually measured, even social link, as Marek said, and to have this as an objective, reciprocity, relationship are at the basis of the non-profit organization. They are invisible in all the budget. They ask for market resources, non-market resources, and reciprocity resources. They are not often asked for. But if you take out reciprocity, you won't have all the outcomes that you've got, given market resources and non-market resources. So for me, this is really important to show that you have a lot of invisible resources that have a visible impact, by the way. Okay, I stop here. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. I think we probably should wrap up now. Do you want to, is there anything, or do you want to join me? Or but I think just to say, I mean, there's one thing to say within this process in relationship to T-Factor, we are going to be using this event. I think the questions it raises lots more questions, which is really what the aim was, and there's so many here. And I mean, actually, there was one in the audience was about the difference in terms of the linguistic nomenclatures, like you say social, we say community, and what do we mean by that? I'm sure there's a lot of stuff going on there. But we're going to be feeding this back through the pilots of T-Factor as well in November. So this is going into some other part of the project. So I mean, I'm not sure there's much I can sum up with. I think I'd like to thank, sorry, I can't remember, Julia. Thank you so much for doing an amazing job. Might I say, not just in terms of making extraordinary drawings, but actually conceptually understanding what we're talking about, which I think is incredible. And I'm in absolute awe of that. It's extraordinary. Elise, what would you? Yeah. This is much more your gig than mine.
Yeah, I just wanted to repeat the thank yous and to just say that I really appreciate the conversation that we've had tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning, this has kind of evolved out of various conversations of everything. Oh, there are parallels, and kind of what could they be, and how can we explore them? And I think this was just such a useful first step in beginning to kind of almost triangulate around something that does resist, the definition kind of thing. And maybe we don't want that. And I think that's the value of these kind of events and working across contexts and languages. So I just wanted to say big thanks, and that we're going to be sharing the content from this online, so you'll be able to go back and look at it.
Thanks to everyone who has presented today, by the way. We really do appreciate it. You've obviously put so much work and thought into it. And I haven't do it properly, but thank you, Adam. Adam Thorpe is our PI, but he's more than that. And he's another reason why we're here. By the way, we're going to have drinks now. And in the room, I know there's a lot of you here from Marseille and the Friche, but there's quite a lot of other people from London who are here. So do talk to people, because you all speak English, obviously. Some of us speak French, so you have to...
One or two.
So there's drinks and there's...